your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. This is the Atheist Manifesto. Hello, dear friends, and welcome to the Atheist Manifesto. I am your host, Callie Wright, joined once again by my uber-fantabulous co-host, Ari Stillman. What's up, Ari?
Hi, I forgot we were doing this until I was leaving for work, or leaving from work. Damn, I fucked up the thing. I always fuck up the things. The thing is fucked.
So, did I just catch that you prepared by writing a thing about not being prepared, or was that, entirely improvised? Should I be super impressed?
Oh, yeah, that was all improvised. That was it.
Okay.
That's
fair.
all I got.
All
I've
right.
spent all weekend out of town. We're recording this on Tuesday, and I just, got back to my place, this afternoon, and then went straight to work, and then came straight back to here. So I'm all discombobulated, but this is happening.
Aw, poor Ari, discombobulated. Anyway, so this episode, we are talking about toxic positivity. And just to give kind of a quick rundown, because anytime I talk about it on Facebook, I usually get a couple of people asking what it is. And so basically toxic positivity is when people sort of try to overwhelm you and tell you that, if you don't have a positive attitude, that's the source of all of your problems. A little bit more complicated than that. We'll unpack it all the way. But think of those memes where it's you don't need medication for your depression. You just need to go running, or you need to spend time in the forest, and that kind of silly stuff. So we have our dear friend Tony back on the show. Welcome, friend.
Thank you. Good to be back.
And to start us off, you have a story to tell.
I do. I have a story about an absolutely miserable experience I had eating recently. So there's this little hipstery restaurant called Pieology in very near where I live. And it's basically pizza on hipster steroids. And it was one of the only few places nearby that we knew had gluten-free stuff that we could go to. Because my wife and I, our mutual girlfriend, she has, I think, undiagnosed celiac. But she can't have gluten. It ruins her intestines. And so we went in there to eat food like you do.
It's a reasonable thing for a person to do.
And first of all, you walk in and you're immediately overwhelmed by those slogans shoot for the moon, and if you fall short, you'll get the stars, and the good attitude is all you need. At such a density that it became very difficult to exist in that area because there were just posters with slogans over every inch of the wall, and all of the employees' uniforms were covered with hard work is the best thing, and all of the employees looked like they personally wanted to die.
Right, because let's face it, very few people actually thrive in environments like that.
Oh yeah, every single person working there looked like if the floor opened up and invited them to hell, they'd be like, this might as well happen. And the pizza was disgusting.
Great.
But almost as a comment on exactly how ableist all of that rhetoric is, there was no disabled seating in the restaurant, and the benches were the most uncomfortable thing I have ever seen. You know that hostile architecture you see in big cities that don't want the homeless people where the rich people can see them?
Oh, spikes and stuff.
They put the fucking spikes on the floor.
Right.
Yeah. The entire inside of the most comfortable seat in that restaurant was the toilet.
Wow.
I seriously threw my hips out on a bench. It was that bad. And it was awful because I'd gone in there having a good physical day, and I came out of there having a bad physical day and really annoyed. But the only disability is my bad attitude, right?
Right, exactly. God. And and so one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on is because I feel like toxic positivity, it's not exclusively ableism, but it's mostly ableism,
it's
right?
It's 95% ableism, but it's that kind of ableism that occasionally affects the abled, and therefore it's the only ableism that actually counts as something we talk about.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, I see it in things like forgiveness culture, where like you're supposed to forgive everyone who wrongs you, and if you refuse to do so, then you're the problem. Or things like I was told in a support group once that I wasn't being patient and kind enough with my family, and that's why my grandma wasn't coming around to me being trans. Like, so it was my fault.
Yeah, it's your fault for not having sunshine out your ass 24/7.
Right. And so, and the thing to me that's so insidious about this, and I feel like this is maybe, I don't want to say universally true, but it's true across a lot of subjects, is that like in some ways, for some people, in some circumstances, sometimes there's a sliver of truth, right?
Yeah.
Like positive thinking and a positive attitude and that kind of stuff. Like it can be helpful.
There's certainly, it's not going to help you to spend your entire life constantly being a pessimist. And like, even with things that like, I have multiple chronic illnesses that I will literally never recover from. And while there is nothing wrong with saying I have multiple chronic illnesses that I will literally never recover from, there's also nothing wrong with saying, but if I take my meds and do all the things I need to do, then I can have more good days than bad days. Like that's helpful. Positivity is not inherently bad. And in fact, it can be what makes what makes or breaks a situation. But this blind sort of, it's the difference between a positivity that's actually meant to help you and a positivity that's meant to silence you.
Exactly. Yeah. The real difference that I see there is where toxic positivity comes in is telling people that they're not allowed to ever feel bad or be angry or, you know, whatever it is that they're experiencing. Because like, oh, it's not good for you to feel to be down on yourself or be down on your situation. There's nothing you can do to change it. You should just, you know, embrace your life and embrace what you have. Yes, that's true. But there are some times where things just literally, like there's nothing you can do about it and you just feel bad and you can't force yourself to feel better. And when you have people around you telling you that you shouldn't feel whatever it is that you feel, that can be bad for your mental health, I think, like even worse than what's going on, because sometimes things are bad and you are totally justified in feeling bad about it and letting yourself feel bad instead of judging yourself and saying, you know, I shouldn't feel this way. I should just be positive. And then you feel guilty because you can't, because you're a normal human being who experiences a range of emotions and not just happiness all the time.
Yeah, like when I'm having a down day, like something that I found that actually helps me when I'm feeling very depressed and nothing makes me feel better is to actually just accept and sort of inhabit those feelings for a minute and sort of explore like, okay, so I know at some point this will pass because I've been through this before.
You can't solve a problem if you're not acknowledging that it exists.
Yep, exactly. And so I'm like, you know what? Like, I'm just going to live here for a second and I'm going to feel bad and I'm going to sort of explore these feelings and learn how to exist in this space. And then, you know, doing that and acceptance, I don't know if acceptance is the right word, because it's not like I don't want to like, oh, yeah, I'm fine if I'm depressed forever, not a big deal. But like just sort of accepting like, okay, I feel like this right now. I'm not going to be able to flip a switch.
There's a huge difference between like acceptance and surrender.
That's a fantastic call out. Yeah.
Yeah. Is acceptance is the right word. And it's part of this toxic positivity culture that says that acceptance is bad. It's like, if you accept that something is bad, then you have made it worse. Like that is exactly the culture we are talking about here today, is the culture that says a grounded in reality approach is bad.
Well, and how many, to go right back to the point, like how many of those videos have we seen on Facebook about like the doctor said he would never walk again, but he refused to accept that. And now like,
and the implication is that the reason that I can't walk is because I accepted that I can't walk. And if I was just, you know, a little more tenacious, little do they know how tenacious I am.
Right. Well, and I mean, like, you know, again, like sometimes a positive attitude helps, but like there's no amount of a positive attitude that's going to like if your spinal cord is severed in a certain place, like you're not going to positive think that spinal cord into healing. Like that's just not how shit works.
Yeah. I mean, the way I've always looked at it is from my point of view, So you know how a lot of toxic positivity comes in the form of very sellable slogans?
Oh, yeah.
Like it's slapped on memes, shared on Facebook, the point of which is to get likes and advertising.
Sold on
views.
T-shirts.
Sold on T-shirts.
Over and over again.
Water bottles, you know. It's a way that capitalism can reinforce oppression because they are selling to you this notion that your marginalization is your fault. And they are selling to you this concept that you should be silent and make yourself uncomfortable so that the oppressor class can continue to be comfortable. Because it is legitimately, it's very uncomfortable for everyone in this room to hear me say some very genuinely true shit. Like, my brain is chemically wired to make me want to kill myself about once a year. That's fucking uncomfortable for y'all. That's just where I live. But the idea behind toxic positivity is selling to me that I should never acknowledge that so that you guys can continue to live in a world where you never had to hear me say that, because you hearing me say that was way worse than anything I'm experiencing living in it. And I'm just like, I'm the one with neurons that aren't firing right. It should be my prerogative to decide how I address that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's part of the broader culture that's like, most people aren't like that. So the people that are wrong. And that's, you know, something to be excised and something to be pushed to the outside instead of something to just be accepted as like, well, that's just part of the spectrum of human experience. Like, there are people who live that way, and there's nothing like morally wrong with that. Like, people, that's just how people are. And what we need to do is figure out how to accommodate folks and help folks through those things. Like, build a world where it's not difficult, nigh impossible to navigate the world as a person who is wired that way.
And I mean, another part of it is also the illusion of control. Is there's this notion that if you live a good life and do good things, that bad things won't happen to you. And therefore, if bad things have happened to you, you must have... It's a very Catholic notion. That if bad things have happened to you, it's because you have strayed in some way. So it's this reinforcing idea of, you know, the good disabled person is the person who doesn't accept when the doctor tells them that they're disabled and works really hard and keeps a positive attitude and overcomes their sin, disability.
Right.
And... and recovers from it, and it's all a matter of, you know, getting your heart right with God in different words. And it's also a place of fear from a lot of abled people, I've noticed, because the other message that even people who have no experience with disability, like, tomorrow a car accident could remove someone's limb. And in an instant, somebody who's been a marathon runner for their whole life now has to learn how much prosthetics cost. And that didn't happen for a reason. No matter like who wants to sell it to you as it's your anti-drunk driving PSA or,
right.
You know, that's what your life is now. It's about this. It doesn't happen for a reason. And that's fucking terrifying.
Yeah. Absolutely.
When I was 14, I was running around on a farm happy and healthy. This happened to me. And it's different and difficult and scary and considered bad. And in the eyes of the rest of the world makes me less of a person. And the idea that just happens, and then when it has just happened, there's nothing you can do about it. It is so much easier to sit back and like consume 500,000 feel-good stories about like kid with autism experiences first concert and like
right.
Convince yourself that if you just chug enough of the Kool-Aid that everything's going to be Gucci. It's the more comfortable way to live.
Well, yeah, we build this model of the world where, like you said, like if you're a good person, quote unquote, that good things happen to you, and that, and I like take a personal situation for me. It's, I've run into health problems lately, and like ostensibly I've done everything right? Like I lost a ton of weight, I eat healthy, I exercise a whole bunch, and so like I shouldn't have problems, right?
Yeah, according to the current models that stand, like you've gotten unfat, therefore everything's perfect now, right?
Yep. And
You've
it's
done what society asks you to do.
right. And we'll have this conversation a million times, and I will 100% acknowledge that like all of the stuff that we're talking about, it's not real, but it's internalized, right? It's
Yeah.
what I've been taught my entire life. And so when I have this horrifying stomach pain and I go to the emergency room, it goes away and we're all laughing. It was like, I spent a night in the ER because I had indigestion. That's hilarious. And then the doctor's like, oh yeah, you know that CT scan that we ran just to be sure? There's actually a giant sack of fluid around your heart. So like probably want to get that checked out. And I'm like, holy shit, I've done everything right. I'm supposed to be healthy, right? Like
Yeah.
it completely
Health
blows
is
apart your model of the
supposed to
world.
be a virtue.
Yeah, exactly. And that's even like, again, if I'm thinking about it and we're having the conversation, 100%, I have zero argument with anything you said, but still it's very internalized,
Yeah.
And so it's even sort of like blown apart my own model of the world because I think the same thing. I'm like, I'm exercising, I'm training to play a sport, I lost a whole bunch of weight. Like I should have or I'm young, I'm 33 years old. I shouldn't have heart problems at 33 years old. That's not how shit's supposed to work. But like, that is how shit works. So yeah, I'm curious, Ari, and I'm sure you've got tons of stories around mental health, right? Because this has been a journey for you. So I'm interested in some of your experiences around this.
Well, the thing that really comes up for me, talking about toxic positivity, is, and I'm sure that Tony can relate to this because I know that you've talked about this a little bit before on other podcasts that we've been on together, about having an upbringing that was very emotionally abusive and neglectful. Is that I growing up was not supposed to express distress or anxiety or anything else that wasn't just kind of cheerily doing whatever it was that my mother told me to do. And so I grew up even outside of this this cultural notion that we have about that bad emotions are bad and you're not supposed to feel them. That's why they're called bad emotions. They're called negative emotions. And
your goal should be to purge them from you because
right. You're not supposed to feel these bad things. And then on top of that general cultural message that most of us get in our culture, I also had a parent who would punish me for feeling those things and expressing those things. And so I learned to stifle those things and not let those show. And so going through therapy, you talked a little bit earlier, Callie, about kind of acceptance and sitting in that and just letting yourself feel that. That's something that I've had to work on a lot. And it's something that I still work on quite a bit. Feeling like, my life isn't that bad. Why do I feel bad a lot of times? People have it much worse than me.
Oh God, that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. and
the only person in the world who is allowed to suffer is that one person who has it objectively the worst.
Yeah. Right. Let me know who that person is. It'd be interesting to know what their life is like. But yeah, that is something, especially with my first therapist, my first long-term therapist, when I was really working on trauma stuff, a lot of it was just going through and allowing myself to feel these emotions that I wasn't supposed to feel at the time that traumatic things happened to me and that I couldn't feel, or I could feel them, but I couldn't express them in order for me to be safe. In the environment that I was in. So, when I see toxic positivity, sometimes it kind of smacks of that kind of thing, and I don't really appreciate it. But then at the same time, like you said as well, I have all these internalized things that I know now are not true, that it's perfectly normal to feel bad sometimes, especially if you have, diagnosed mental illnesses like I do. That's why it's a diagnosed mental illness, is because it's affecting my life. And that's perfectly valid, given the combination of genetics and upbringing that I have, that I would experience that. And so it's still something that I'm going through, although I have made a lot of progress, is acknowledging that I am going to struggle with most of these things, most likely for the rest of my life. It's very unlikely that, there will be periods where it's better and periods where it's worse, but it's very unlikely that I will ever be cured of my mental illnesses. So, just kind of accepting that and realizing that it is okay to feel bad emotions and not try and push them down or push them away. And that it's perfectly normal to not feel happy all the time. Even people without mental illnesses don't feel happy all the time. And there's so much pressure in our culture to constantly be happy every second of every day. And that's just not realistic.
And I feel like there's got to be a huge intersection with that, like your specific circumstance and this forgiveness culture that we talk about, how like you're never supposed to have bad feelings towards people who hurt you, and that like the ultimate way of excising whatever effect that has on you is that you have to let go of whatever bad feelings you have towards someone who hurt you, and I think that's one of the more sort of toxic expressions of this idea, because it leaves you feeling bad. Like, okay, this person did a horrible thing to me, but like I'm the bad person because I can't
let go of it.
Yeah. Well, not even let go. Like I can't develop the touchy feelies for someone who hurt me, and that makes me a bad person.
Yeah. Something I'm sure when I look back on the video recording of this, I'm going to watch me go on a face journey, because something just crystallized for me that I wasn't planning on talking about, because I didn't realize was a problem. But now I've realized this was gross as fuck, and now I know why.
If you're comfortable sharing, bring it. Let's hear it.
Absolutely, because Ari was talking about abusive parents and toxic positivity culture and how those two things work on the same spectrum. And so, very, very long, complicated story short. My parents are well-meaning garbage fires. And one of the things that happened early in me calling them out on being garbage fires and separating from them is my mom decided, hey, you know those beloved family pets that we're going to give to you when you have a place where you can't? Well, that's no longer the case. And in fact, when you come to get them, I'm going to put your cat that you hand raised in a carrier and take her away and not see you or your wife and hide the cat, because like I'm going to punish you for having a spine by taking the things that are rightfully yours. And so it was a huge problem in our relationship for a very long time. Fast forward for like a year, like 2-3 years after she did that. And I get a call on fucking Valentine's Day, which, to get a little personal, this was so frustrating for me because I was having a nice couch nap at noon on Valentine's Day because my wife was going to come home after work on Valentine's Day. And there were things I was going to do that were going to be fun for me.
Right.
And, wound up not happening because my mom calls me at noon in tears like, we're gonna have to shoot your cat. Which, if
what
that is
Jesus fuck,
right?
Wow.
And I'm like, why? And she's like, because she's in kidney failure. And I'm like, you know this because you took her to the vet? And she's like, no, your father, who got a PhD in biology 45 years ago and thinks he's God, has decided that's what's going on with her. And therefore, it's the kindest thing to do to put her down. And I'm like, no. I have money. Because the thing was, they didn't take her to the vet because they didn't have money. And mom decided that the way to ask me for money to treat my cat was to call me and tell me she was going to kill my cat. So we wound up spending like $500. She had a fucking stomach flu.
Oh my God.
She ate a weird bug and felt a little gross. Long story short, I have my cat back. I will show you pictures of this cat. She's lovely. I also had to do an emergency trip 10 hours down to North Carolina, sleep on their garbage couch, pick up my cat, pay off the vet bill, learned they have a $7,000 unpaid vet bill, and the vet is clearly okay with letting them add to it. So that was pure bullshit from my mom. But like, all in all, massive amount of emotional burden on me aside, it was actually a decent visit. Because, I mean, the bar's super low, but like my wife got to meet my mother. And like actually eat some of my mom's cooking. But we were at dinner, having a peaceful dinner between the family before we drove back up with the cat. And I was joking around about like some of the positive things that have happened in my childhood. Cause like, I really like the country. For everything that's gone wrong, I really like physically where I grew up. And I was like enjoying petting horses and cats and dogs and like getting my animal fix and really excited and happy that I got my cat back and that she was alive. Because I hadn't quite parsed the cloud of bullshit that this was. because you don't learn to parse that.
Sure. Well, I mean, you're in the middle of it.
Yeah.
You can't see the big picture sometimes.
So I was joking about like good stuff, and my father from across the table, knowing full well that like this is the man who called me a waste of oxygen when I was 9 years old. And like this man is a sack of shit to my self-esteem. And one of the things he did was he said, well, it's not, you had such an awful childhood, didn't you? Like knowing that was the sore subject, but he was trying to get me, because we were in a good mood, to join in and acknowledge this notion that they'd done nothing wrong ever.
Oh,
Yep,
God.
exact same thing has happened to me many, many times.
And it was like, to my credit, I didn't let him get away with it. And I'm kind of proud of myself for that. But
Absolutely.
like, I was just sitting here thinking, he absolutely used the language of like, your life's amazing, don't frown, to try and absolve himself of the guilt of a lot of shit.
Yeah, that reminds me, it's not quite on that level, but that reminds me of a conversation I had with my grandma where I was explaining to her what it was doing to me mentally to know that she was so opposed to me transitioning and being trans and being queer and all this sort of stuff. And all of the conversations we had where it's like, it was a complicated thing where it wasn't outright like, you're trans, I hate that, therefore I hate you, therefore like we can't have a relationship anymore. It was just these like sort of quote unquote gentle barbs of like, well, you know what the Bible has to say about that whole thing, and there's a demon and all of this sort of stuff. And I was trying to explain to her, I was like, you have to understand that like this is literally who I am, right?
And you can't just jab at who someone is.
Right. And so what from her perspective, this is a thing I'm doing. From my perspective, this is who I am, right?
Yeah.
And so I was trying to explain to her, I'm like, so when you say these things, you're saying that about me as a person, and like that's really hurtful to me. And then she's like, well, you think it's not hurtful to me what you're doing? And I was like, that's not, I get where you're coming from. You're 80 years old, you're old fashioned, this is all new. Like, I'm not saying you're not allowed to have feelings about it, but can we please just agree that's not the same fucking thing? Like, this is not a congruent situation.
It shouldn't be your burden to hold all of this emotional labor so that she cannot have to do any of her own emotional work. And how old she is should have nothing the fuck to do with it.
Well, exactly, because I have 80-year-olds in my life who are like, oh, okay, so you're Callie now, and you're she, and you're going to get a vagina. Sweet, go do the thing. I hope you have a good time. Like,
Congrats on the science vagina.
Right. But I've had... And I've had internal conversations where I think to myself, I think back to all of the amazing times that we had childhood, because I was her favorite grandkid, right? And like, you know, she would tell me like on the DL, like, hey, you're the only one of my grandkids that actually goes out of your way to spend time with me. And so like, I got the extra Christmas presents and that kind of stuff. And I think back to that kind of stuff. And then I think to myself, like, gosh, I owe her a chance. Because that's what you're supposed to do, right? And I do the thing you were talking about, Ari, where it's like, well, it wasn't all bad, right? Like, it's been a lot worse for other people, so like maybe I owe her a chance. And I'm like, but how many chances did I give her? And how many times have I tried to have this conversation and tried to explain things and just got stonewalled and stonewalled and stonewalled? And I'm like, there is nothing actually good that's going to come from this. And when I've had that conversation with other people, it's like, well, she's your grandma, you should try. And I'm like, her being my grandma doesn't have anything to do with it. Like, I can accept that she did a lot of good things for me growing up, and we had a really good relationship growing up. So like, she gets more of a shot than some random asshole on the street. Yeah. You know what I mean? But like, at some point, it is okay for me to make the decision to say, like, you know, nothing good is going to come from this. I'm going to separate myself from this situation. And like, if she wants to approach me and try to fix the relationship, I mean, I'm not going to just ignore her phone calls forever, but like at some point it's okay for me to say, like, I've made tons of effort, nothing's come from it. So like, you're going to have to be the one who comes to me now. And like, just becoming okay with that was such a process.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't have to be.
Literally a few weeks ago, I woke up and I texted Jeremiah and I was like, good morning. Today I am feeling guilty because sometimes my mom would buy me things that I asked for from the store.
Right.
Like, it's like almost 2.5 years since I got contact with her, and I'm still like, oh, she used to buy me those Gushers. That was nice of her. Maybe,
Right.
maybe I shouldn't be so hard on her for all the terrible things that she did.
Oh, absolutely. Same here, because like my mom read The Hobbit and the Harry Potter series to me like a chapter a night every night over several years. Our family activity was hanging out and reading a few chapters, and like somehow that activity is supposed to like balance out for the fact that she nearly killed my wife. Her gross negligence literally nearly took my wife's life away because she didn't think that she needed to be responsible for the things she needs to be responsible for. But like, I think one of the hardest things for any abuse survivor or any person who's come out of a situation to get their head around is that all human beings are a mix of good and bad traits.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that just because somebody did something bad to you doesn't mean you are no longer allowed to access and enjoy your positive memories. And also, just because you have positive memories with somebody doesn't mean they have a place in your life.
Yeah, I think that's the healthiest way to look at it. And I think the message that we need to be sending people is that like you get to make the decision where that line is, right? Because if you decide that there is more good than bad in this relationship and that it's worth it for you to stick around, then like that's a decision you get to make. And if you decide that no, this is bad and I'm going to cut this off, you're not a bad person for doing that. You haven't given up, at least not in that giving up has a negative connotation. Sometimes giving up is the right thing to do because
sometimes giving up is the best thing you could possibly do.
Yeah, and it's so hard because I also think to myself like some of this stuff is part of this sort of toxic positivity culture, but then some of it I feel like is a defense mechanism, right?
Yeah.
Like you want to think these bad things that happen to me, how can I rationalize them into being less bad so I don't feel as bad about them? And I like it's hard to suss out the difference between the two.
I mean, there is a certain one of the things the human brain does really, really, really well is protects itself. Mm-hmm. Whether or not that becomes helpful coping mechanisms that produce a healthy life is a broader picture that's a bit out of the grasp of the chemical level brain. But it's kind of the same function going behind a lot of toxic positivity is if I just reformat, maybe this bad thing won't be a thing.
Yeah. Well, and I think that gets back to what you were talking about before about sort of like blowing up people's models of the world, because people who live in a privileged space where things are mostly good for them most of the time, they sort of build this model of the world where that's just how the world is. And like bad stuff happens to people over there, right?
And people over there must be over there for a reason.
Exactly.
It's an illusion of control, which, again, Catholicism.
Right. And it makes the world feel less safe to acknowledge that like no,
It's
this
the
is
just world fallacy.
Yes.
It's way more comfortable to live in a world where everything is just and everything happens for a reason, and there are reasons that and there's logic and order, and it's really just random chaos and death and suffering that comes from nowhere. And also something that doesn't get talked about as much is rewards and positive things that also come from nowhere and you may or may not have deserved that just plunk down in your lap. It's so much there. The world, physics don't care about your sense of virtue.
Yep. The universe does not have a sense of justice.
Yeah, your personal moral virtue has nothing to do with major events in your life and your physical body and your financial situation. That's not how those systems work.
And for me, I think what it comes down to is understanding that your interactions with other people, especially in situations like this, should be about helping the other person, not reinforcing your model of reality. And obviously part of that is recognizing that that's what you're doing in the first place, right? Like that's enough of a journey on its own, just figuring out like, oh, I'm trying to protect my model of the world in the guise of like thinking I'm helping.
Yeah.
So like,
and you're also reinforcing a lot of the things about that makes dealing with people who are dishing toxic positivity at you that makes it so difficult is they genuinely believe in their worldview that they are furthering their position of being a good person by saying these things to you. I had an experience Christmas 2 years ago that I still carry guilt for, that I should not carry guilt for, where a mother was teaching her young son, who's like 9, how to behave in the world around him. And we were all on the elevator together, and she instructed her son to push me out of the elevator. Now that is not, you do not touch someone's handles on their wheelchair. You do not push someone without their consent.
Yeah, like quick lesson, accessibility devices are an extension of a person's body, and you never do anything to them without permission.
Yeah,
and that goes for service dogs too, by the way.
Yes.
If you wouldn't shove your hands in my back pockets and physically move my butt and thighs, you should not be pushing my wheelchair without my consent. It's my body, it's my consent boundary. So this lovely mother trying to teach her son at fucking Christmas about being a good citizen. And this kid was clearly very
I'm helping.
Like, I'm helping.
Yep.
I'm a good child.
Yep.
And he, on training, did something very wrong. And I tried to correct him, and the response I got from the mom was like, come on, it's Christmas, basically. And it was like,
okay,
it's about making yourself feel better.
Yep.
Not actually helping was the message that, and like, especially, I don't want to get too deep into it, but this was a white woman teaching her white son that his ego was more important than my bodily autonomy.
Yeah.
Like, his sense of being a good person was more important than my bodily autonomy, and me standing up for my bodily autonomy was a bad thing. Like, I can only imagine the lesson this kid learned is other people expressing boundaries is bad. You are allowed to do whatever you want to do as long as it fulfills this notion of being a better person. And she like, I know you don't want your son touching people without their permission.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but she doesn't see it as that.
Yeah. And it's 100% about how it's sort of like, it's about how they're perceiving the world, not how the world actually is. Mm-hmm. And it's a very anti-reality standpoint.
Yeah. Well, again, it's about actually helping, right? There's a gentleman who uses a wheelchair where I work. One time it looked like he was having trouble getting the door. So I hollered over and said, hey, need help with that door? And he's like, no, I'm good. And I'm like, cool. Have a good day.
Like, yeah, that's
like, it can
that's
be that easy,
interaction.
right? Like, it doesn't have to be that complicated.
I mean, it's the same thing you do with somebody with an armful of boxes, or just somebody pushing the door against the wind.
Yeah. It's really not that difficult. So what I would like to end the episode talking about is, so like a lot of what we have talked about here is doing it wrong, right? About the ways that this hurts people. And so what I would like to sort of end the episode talking about is ways to do it right, how we can actually help, and how we can sort of turn this around and actually do positivity that is helpful and affirmative. I would call it maybe restorative positivity.
Yeah.
Thoughts from Ari or Tony from the panel?
I mean, one of the things that I see around the chronic illness community, which is usually it's a really difficult community for people to swallow, because especially people who have no experience with it. The way my analogy is always the disability community tends to have two facets, and it's really well explained if you're an X-Men nerd. Whereas the difference between somebody whose mutation gives them a really cool power and then like Scissorhands Mike, who kills everything he touches.
Right.
There's the chronic illness community is basically a bunch of Scissorhands Mike. Like, there's 4 or 5 of us sitting around bedbound and unable to do anything, and like 5 people posting "sucks to die of cancer" memes.
Right.
And it's depressing as shit, but one of the things that we've found collectively, a form of positivity that really helps us, is just acknowledge it sucks. Mm-hmm. Just tell me that really fucking sucks. I'm sorry you're going through that. Would you like some chocolate? That is way better than any Walmart slogan you could ever come. Like, seriously, acknowledge it sucks. Like, and be there for me in some capacity. If you want to actually spread positivity, be like, commiserate. Even if you cannot relate, be like, that sounds bananas awful.
Yeah.
That simple phrase, just that sucks, is so helpful.
Well,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
when you're surrounded by people who are telling you like, oh, well, if you would just have a better attitude, you might feel better. Like, I have to imagine, like, in a sea of that, hearing gosh, I'm really sorry that's happening. That's got to be awful. Like,
You're my
that's
best
gotta
friend
be
now.
Such a breath of fresh air. Well, and I saw that a lot in surgery recovery, like the trans forums, right? Like, I'm just going to name names like Susan's Place and all of these forums that are just forums that are sort of overrun by older white trans women typically are just hotbeds of this sort of awfulness when it comes to trans stuff. Like, you know, your family won't accept you because you're not being nice enough or patient enough. And like, if you have any struggles relating to surgery or transition, like your attitude's not positive enough, or like before my weight loss, or actually right after my weight loss surgery, big struggle that I had, I didn't realize that I'm a texture person, right?
Yeah.
Because I never in my life had been presented with it in a situation where my choices in texture were limited. So I had no idea that was a thing for me. And so I was eating puree for 2 weeks and I realized, yeah, that's a thing for me. I can't hang with that. I don't do well with that. And so I was in this Facebook group and I said, hey, I am really struggling with the pureed phase of the diet. Can anyone give me advice, or do you have any recipes for some interesting flavors that I might not think of that aren't obvious? And this guy was like, well, I just say enjoy it. And I'm like, gosh,
I would love to be able to decide my emotions.
Like-
Will you please give me that ability?
if only I'd thought of just enjoying this thing that's torture for me. Gosh, what a concept, you know? And I was, and I tried to be very like, I was like, so I get where you're coming from, but that's not super helpful. Like I said, I'm struggling with this thing and I'm looking for two very specific things that would help me. One being some recipes, and two, like just like some affirmation and some commiseration. And then I started getting lectured about
You
my
got
attitude.
told that you're
And
wrong
yes.
for having a bad feeling.
Yeah. And then like, I felt like, so accessing transition related surgery, mega privilege, right? I had to spend a ton of money to do it. A lot of people don't have insurance coverage to do it, don't have money to do it, don't have access to do it. It's a huge privilege, right?
And also
super
don't
grateful.
have a healthy body that can handle the surgery.
Exactly.
Because that's the thing, is there's a lot of trans people with like blood diseases who could never.
Yeah, oh, I have a friend who has a heart problem and can only take like a very, very small dosage of hormones because of that. So like even hormones. But so like that leads to me like, I am not allowed to struggle with my surgery recovery because like I got to do this thing that so many people don't get to do. And
How dare you struggle while also having privilege, Callie?
right, exactly.
You are not the chosen one of suffering, Callie.
Right. But again, like in the sea of voices, I would just say something like, gosh, I'm not having a good day. This really hurts. And someone's saying like, gosh, that really sucks. I hope you feel better soon. Please be gentle with yourself and like eat some candy or something. And I'm like,
You're valid. Drink water. It's like, I mean, you hear that enough and it starts to lose meaning. But even then, it's nowhere near as annoying as your feelings are wrong and you just need to feel the right feelings. And like,
yeah. I mean, I think that's so much of what this is, right? Like I feel these feelings. So like, and it's usually like, I feel bad and then I feel bad for feeling bad. And one of the best things anyone has ever told me is like, yeah, I understand why you feel that way. And if I was in your position, I might feel the same way.
and for some reason,
shit.
that's actually super fucking validating for someone who has no idea what you're going through. I've found that if somebody has literally no experience with anything I'm going through and they're like, you know, that sounds like it sucks, that's so validating.
Or if we can like trade experiences, like you and I have had so many conversations where you tell me like something ridiculous that somebody does like in relation to your wheelchair. And then like we'd have conversations about my CPAP machine and like, you know, it's not the same thing, but we can kind of commiserate a
Yeah.
little bit. And
You speak my language a
right,
little.
exactly. And yeah, and it's
Me and Ari commiserating on garbage parents.
Yeah.
Right. and like, I don't know. It's one of those things that I feel like it's
I mean, it takes a certain amount of maturity to make that conversation not about you.
for sure.
When
for
you,
sure.
when you step in. But like, as long as you are, it's called being an adult.
Right. Like, that's what it comes down
It's
to.
called being a functional adult, understanding that not everything is about you and your desire to performatively do good. And you have to actually do good to be a good person.
Right. So, like, the question that I always ask myself as I'm talking to this person, do I have a reasonable expectation that they feel better after the conversation than they did before? And not about my feelings, not
Yeah.
about me making myself feel good.
Because if the answer is no, then that's important information.
Exactly. If you want to be a good friend.
It's sort of like, I got to know what people's limits are and what people's triggers are so that I can have good conversations with them. It's not about them being an imposition on me. It's about me being a decent human being with empathy. Well, not empathy, because that's something that a lot of people don't have, but just like the ability to...
Empathy, sympathy, compassion.
Empathy. Yes. There's a
Yes.
lovely diagram. You
Yes.
got to have like one of those functioning to be a herd animal,
Yeah.
basically.
Give a shit of some kind.
Give some sort of shit. It doesn't matter how it chemically occurs, but you need to give a shit about other people.
Yeah, and I feel like, I don't know, I feel like this is a long list, another in the long list of things that our society makes super complicated, and it really doesn't have to be.
Exactly.
It's just like there's so much shit that we have to unpack because of cultural programming that, like, when you take a step back and you kind of look at it from a broad view, it's like, gosh, this really shouldn't be difficult or complicated. Like, it is. It really is, but it doesn't have to be.
Weirdly, I feel like it has a lot to do with how we teach people to be parents in our culture. Because
I'm with you. Give me more.
a study I've recently been very fascinated by is a conversation had with parents and children where the parents and the children were both asked what makes a positive, healthy relationship between parent and child. And the parents heard collectively, how do you be a good parent? And so they started spouting out like, make your kid do your homework, vegetables, the things that everyone knows you're supposed to do. And
Right.
the kids' answers were things like, spend time with me, care about me as a person. And I think the longer I've existed as an adult, particularly in the section of people that I tend to get along with well, which is, to put it bluntly, people with garbage parents, I don't think people have been taught how to parent well collectively.
I agree. Yeah, I have no arguments.
Because a lot of how people get taught how to parent is not actually, like, there's this notion that there are right things to do and wrong things to do, and it's not complicated, and you just need to buy my book and capitalism.
Right.
And it's because a lot of the things about toxic positivity is you hear that shit in a kindergarten classroom.
Yeah.
This isn't stuff that people learn as adults. This isn't stuff that people pick up on their own. This is from birth. This is how you are taught to be. Like that woman teaching her son how to be a good person.
Right.
Flagrantly wrong because she made it about making yourself feel good. And like, honestly, kids aren't going to be good people till they're a certain age because the parts of your brain that make you a good person haven't grown in yet. Like, you just gotta, I think after a certain point, you just gotta understand that you've got an animal that eventually becomes a person
Right.
through brain development.
Right.
Like, I feel like if we had more of an understanding of childhood brain development and neurodiversity and all this, like, it's not a perfect solution. It wouldn't make it all go away. But if, like, we stop believing that we can raise human beings with this cookie cutter method and, like, actually develop good parent-child relationships, and it starts at home.
It's almost as if all people are different and have different requirements for health and wellness. And oh, it's so weird. So weird.
So this goes off pretty closely with what Tony said about just kind of affirming that the person feels that way and just saying, I'm sorry, this sucks. I'm sorry that you're going through that. It must be, really hard. So, this is kind of calling out myself as well, because this is something that I have to work on. But I want to encourage people, if you see somebody who is, expressing quote unquote negativity or whatever, my urge, and I think a lot of people's urge, is to try and fix it. Just like, especially, this is something very common in the mental health community that we complain about a lot, is people, assuming that we're not doing, whatever it is that they think we should be doing in order to get better. And they tell us like, oh, you should go to therapy. You should take medication.
Right?
You should go walk in the mountains or whatever. And it's like, yeah, I'm doing all that stuff. I still have mental illness that I will probably have forever. And so that's something that I try and keep in mind whenever I see something like that, is, especially coming from, someone who is in training to be a psychologist. I'm like, here's all the evidence of the things that you can do to help yourself feel better. And it's not helpful to assume that they haven't done that, or that they're not doing it right or up to the standards or whatever. So instead, what I have tried, and I've been actively working on developing, is instead just asking them what they need, or if they need anything, and then trying to do that for them, or offering, like, so people will say like, oh, I'm struggling, I need help finding a therapist. That's something that I can do because I know what to look for in a good therapist. So I say, hey, if you need help with that, let me know. If you need someone to talk to, let me know.
Yep.
If
Actual
there's anything,
help, not control.
Yes.
right, just offering. And sometimes they're going to say, no, there is nothing you can do to help me. I just, I'm going through something tough, that there's nothing I think I could do about it. And I say, okay, I support that. If you think of anything, let me know. Let anyone else know. It doesn't have to be me. Just reach out to anyone who you feel comfortable and safe talking to. If you do decide that you need to talk about it, or that you need help with something practical, that kind of thing. So I would encourage people, instead of assuming that the person isn't doing X, Y, and Z, ask them, what you can do to help them, or if you can help them. And then from the other side, from the more internalized toxic positivity side, again, something I've been still working on. It's something that I've struggled with sometimes, is knowing when is it okay to feel those feelings, and when should I kind of try not to mope so much. And there is a fine line between those two. And it's something that is not always clear. And, this is coming from my experience. This is not, this might not work for everyone. But my advice for that would be to just kind of experiment with things. And I think over time, if you, in one instance, you try to push yourself and it doesn't work out. And then in another instance, you try and push yourself and it does work out and you do end up feeling better. Eventually you will come to see, when are the times that I need to, step back and accept and feel these things and let myself process. And when are the times when it would be better for my mental health in order to, just distract myself, or, actively decide, I'm going to get up off the couch and do something productive today, whatever it is that you need to do. The thing that's helped me, is just kind of experimenting and trying different things at different times and seeing what works and what doesn't. And it does take a long time. It's a learning process, and I don't get it right every time, definitely. But just kind of feeling your way through life, I suppose. Like, I think it's okay to not know exactly what the right answer is, and to kind of fumble around a little bit. And eventually you will, reach a sort of equilibrium where you're able to distinguish between when are those times that sadness is appropriate and when is it maybe not as appropriate.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people underestimate the value of just reminding someone that you give a shit. Like, somebody posts something on Facebook that's like, it's obvious they're having a terrible time. And like, I'll just send that person a text and say, hey, not sure what's going on, and I don't need to know what's going on if you don't want to share. I just want to remind you that I love you and I'm here if you need to talk. And it can be as simple as that. And I've gotten those text messages before. And the key is, if I respond back and say, yeah, you know what, I'm not really in a place where I want to talk about it, but thank you. And that person says, cool, no worries. Just keep in mind that I'm here. Like, because I've also gotten that where it's like, they're just like bombarding me with messages, and it's like, they got to know what's going on. They got to fix it. And I'm like, Not only are you not helping, you're making it worse. Stop.
I mean, I'm gonna sort of nosedive into a dark yet positive place. So I've mentioned that I have a lot of difficulty with emotional regulation, and a lot of times that will just self-generate me feeling like I would rather like to die. And it can last like a month or so, and it is a garbage fire. But I've found that there tends to be two types of responses to me expressing that to someone. And the first is the one that's not helpful and actually rather makes me want to kill myself more. It's let me tell you all the ways the world would be worse without you, and all the people who care about, and it comes from this place of genuine concern, and people don't want me to die, and I can't really be mad at them, but at the same time, like, hearing about all the guilt of what I should be experiencing that I'm not. And like that's sort of that very, it's a well-meaning attempt, but telling me like all of the things that I do for other people that wouldn't be around anymore and how everyone else would be so sad is not helpful. One of the most important things that has ever been said to me when I was depressed was when I wanted to kill myself was, I don't agree, but I won't be mad at you if you do it. And it's just like, wow, you mean I'm allowed to feel this bad and want this thing that would make that in my head would make me not feel this bad? It's like, yeah, you're allowed to do that. You are allowed to want to die. And even then, like, I would like to watch a couple episodes of Steven Universe with you first.
Right.
But like, in like 11 hours or so, if you want to kill yourself, fucking go ahead. And, sure enough, 10 minutes later, I have never felt more stable.
Yeah. Yeah. We're not allowed to feel so many things. And I think it's so liberating just to be affirmed. Like, even if it's being affirmed and feeling awful, just because on some level, you feel the guilt, like I should be able to talk myself out of this, right?
Yeah.
But on some level, that's bullshit. Like there is no degree right now to which I have control over the way that I'm feeling, and to just have somebody else acknowledge that.
Yeah.
I think that can be so huge, and it's not difficult to do, right?
Right. It's the thing is, it is the most low effort on my part and the most helpful for you. It's the optimal solution because I can just be like, that fucking sucks. And you just are like, like burdens off your chest.
Yeah. Well, Tony, this has been awesome. Thank you so much.
It's been awesome. I've enjoyed the shit out of this conversation.
I am so glad. I have as well, and I think we have gotten some super valuable insights. That, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto. If you think what we do here is important, please share this around to your friends. Search the Gaytheist Manifesto on Facebook and Twitter to find us there. I'm at Gaytheist Callie on Twitter. You can email us at podcast@thegaytheistmanifesto.com. And does Ari have a thing?
Well, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I kind of fucking forgot about this until right before we did it. So I don't have anything prepared, but I will say that I spent this Memorial weekend out camping near Aspen, Colorado with Jeremiah and several of his friends. And, they always say, go get out in nature, do hiking. It's good for you. I'd like everyone to know that, I still experienced mental health symptoms during the trip. And today, the day after coming back from the trip, I have experienced mental health symptoms. And that's totally fucking fine because that's my life. So, yeah, hiking is fun, but maybe it won't cure you. But anyways, if you want to contact me, I'm on Facebook at Ari Stillman. I'm on Gmail. Can you say I'm on Gmail? Is that a thing you could say? I have a Gmail, aristillman4@gmail.com. I also do the Sister Getting Out of Hand podcast and the SJW Circle Jerk, where we recently, last episode we put out was all about service dogs, which ties in well to this conversation here. So if you're interested in, dogs. Ableism and disability and things, service dogs, good thing to know about. There you go. That's my thing. Very clever. I'm awesome and great.
So Ari still manages to be clever and hilarious even when they're completely unprepared. I wish I had that kind of talent. We are a part of the Trans Podcaster Visibility Initiative. We are a group of trans podcasting badasses working to bring more trans voices into podcasting and other content creation. Search the Trans Podcaster Visibility Initiative on Facebook for more info. If you want to support the show and the activism we do, you can head to patreon.com/thegaytheist manifesto, make a per episode donation as little as $1 per episode. And if you can't do that, you can give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, share us around to your friends. It all helps and it all makes a difference. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.